love again. But it's the only way.
Good afternoon and welcome to NUFC Matters with me, Steve Wraith. And I've got to be honest, I've been looking forward to this all weekend. More than looking forward to the match, which is no surprise. It's a big welcome to the godfather of Newcastle commentary, Mick Lowes. How are you, Mick?
In the circumstances, Steve, I'm very good, yeah. I hope everyone out there's staying safe. But, yeah, it's testing times and on and off the pitch, as to use the old cliche. It's not been great.
Oh, Mick, it's been a rocky road for Steve Bruce, and it doesn't get any better after yesterday's performance against Aston Villa. What did you make of that?
I suppose the easiest thing to say is that I wasn't the slightest bit surprised. You know, I watched the game, dare I say it, not expecting anything, didn't get anything. There was no semblance of getting anything either. We're in tough times. We really are in a mess at the minute. I would love to say that it's something that I've never experienced, but as you know and I know, and thousands listening to this, I'm sure know, it's what comes with Newcastle United. When they slide, they slide. When it's good, it's good. But sometimes when it's bad, it's absolutely awful, and it's awful at the minute. It is poor. And combined with the pandemic and combined with the inability to see games and vent your spleen and get excited about football, it just feels horrible. It really does. You feel helpless. You feel like you're completely disconnected with your football club. You feel like football will never go back to what it was before. Simply because, Steve, as you know, and we all know, there are very few clubs in this country, never mind the world, that are so entwined and so there's almost like an umbilical cord between fans and the football club. They go hand in hand in Newcastle. So to take the crowd away, to take the fans away, to take the supporters away, yes, it's affected plenty of other clubs. I mean, I heard the manager of Cheltenham last night, God bless him, say that if we'd had fans in, we might have hung on for the last 10 minutes. And he might have been right. But you times that by 1,000 to try and appreciate the effect that not having 52,000 in at St James's has had on Newcastle and their ability to win games and driving players on in terms of adrenaline and helping them through the game. So, it's a strange one. There are all manner of problems and there are all sorts of people to blame, but the pandemic really hasn't helped because of that lack of a crowd at St James's. I mean, in a strange way, it's probably helped Steve Bruce, because if there'd have been a crowd in there, I'm absolutely certain he wouldn't be sitting, waking, having his breakfast this morning as manager of Newcastle United. So, swings and roundabouts.
The lack of a crowd at Villa Park definitely did him a favour, because not only would have had Newcastle fans probably calling for his head and singing Rafa Benitez's name, you would have had Aston Villa fans making a mockery of it as well. So probably a good thing. Steve Bruce, have you had much dealings with him? I mean, there seems to be a bit of a media love-in for Steve Bruce, and if we take away those people who are represented by the same agent, because we know that happens in football, there is a lot of positivity for Steve, and he's obviously a friendly guy. He's obviously somebody who the players respect, the likes of Alan Shearer, etc. Obviously get on well with him. He's a Geordie lad, but can you understand the media loving for him when it's quite clear that things on the pitch are just not going well?
Well, it's interesting, mate, because, when I was coming on this morning, I was thinking to myself, in those 25 years I was at Newcastle, I had a very different relationship with managers than fans did, even though every night or every Saturday, Sunday, I'd go for a drink with the lads and I'd get pelters for defending a manager, particularly one or two. And what I would always say to them was, in a busy week at St James's, I might interview these people 8 or 9 times. And I therefore develop a relationship with them. And I see the other side of them. I'm not knocking the fans, and I would never knock the fans. But I see so much more of these people than they see. They just see Steve Bruce, the manager, or Alan Pardew, the manager, or John Carver, the manager. I see Steve Bruce. Well, hang on, let me come back to that. I saw Alan Pardew, the person, John Carver, the person, whoever, Steve McLaren, the person. But I haven't really seen Steve Bruce, the manager, the person, although I will come back to that. There's a story I'd like to tell at some point in the hour about Steve Bruce and how very early on in my dealings with him, he made a huge impression on me in the way that he behaved. I think he's a good guy. I do think he's a good guy. But what I would say is, and I was thinking about this morning, in another world, in another life, if Steve Bruce was Stephen Bruce living in Wallsend, working at British Engines with a season ticket for Newcastle United, and all three of those were distinct possibilities when he was 10, 11, 12, whatever, I'm pretty sure as a season ticket holder, he would be calling for the head of the manager of Newcastle United, his beloved football club, this morning, because he understands football, he knows football, regardless of whether he'd been a manager or went on to be a manager. It's what comes with the territory. And now, what I was going to say about the relationship with, I probably don't feel the same sympathy, or I don't have the same understanding of him that I did about Chrissy Houghton or Pardew or whatever. But I do sympathise with him. I do. And I don't like the fact that he came out after the game last night and said, you know, we're one of the few clubs who are going through it at the minute. No one's going through it like Newcastle. Nobody's not won a game in 10. Nobody's shipping goals. Nobody's failing to score. So when they sort of lose sight of the reality of the situation, then you have to question them. But it's a tough job. It's a tough job.
Mm. I've got to ask you about the takeover, and we're going to get through a lot of questions, Mick. A lot of people are delighted that you are coming on, and the questions are flying in, so I do want to get through as many of them as possible. Okay. But the takeover, we know in 2017, I was there, I was with her. Amanda Staveley came to visit Newcastle. We went through the whole shambles of, it was on, it was off, it was on, it was off. They went for a curry, and then, Mike Ashley said he wouldn't do business because she was a tyre kicker. We all thought it was dead. It clearly isn't. She came back with PIF and the Rubens. And what we didn't anticipate was the Big Six and the Premier League, sticking their oar in and basically knocking back a takeover because it involves the Saudi state. So from our perspective, as fans, it couldn't have come at a worse time. Slap bang in the middle of the pandemic. We're all at home. Everyone's heads battered. We can't go at the match. We could be the richest club in the world, or typical Newcastle, we could get relegated and not come back up for a very long time. How do you see this whole takeover situation?
Well, I'll be brutally honest, because I had no dealings with it, because I'm a retired journalist and I'm not any longer in the Northeast and I'm not hands-on. I don't know the ins and outs of it. What I do know, though, is that there are two problems here in terms of Newcastle's malaise at the moment. One, I seriously believe, is the crowd and the lack of crowd. But the essential problem is, as we all know, and this isn't rocket science, this is stating the bleeding obvious, is the owner. So you've got an owner who doesn't care. You've got an owner who's not bothered. Now, you have, in Newcastle's case, as a result, a self-perpetuating cycle, which starts with lack of investment. So lack of investment means that whatever manager, whether it be Steve Bruce, has lesser players to work with. Lesser players are less expansive, therefore the tactics are negative, therefore your chances of losing the game are greater. They invariably do lose the game. They then slip in the table, fans get disgruntled, and the manager gets stick, but also the owner gets stick, quite rightly, because of his lack of investment. That makes him even more apathetic. That makes him even less interested and more disinterested in Newcastle United. So the lack of investment carries on because he's not going to invest in something that's giving him stick and not giving him enjoyment. So it's a self-perpetuating cycle. So to answer your question in a roundabout way, you're right. The key to this whole problem is getting him out and getting investors in. Now, how easy that is, I really don't know. What I do know is, he bought Newcastle for what, 55 million. It's now valued at something like 250, 300 million. What I would honestly say, and I love the club dearly, and I love everything about the place, it's overpriced. It's overpriced. It's priced on potential and potential only. At this minute in time, and for a fairly long time now, it's been a club that's been middling Premier League, occasionally flirting with the Championship. It's not worth the amount of money that he's trying to flog it for. Now, if, as appeared at the time, 3 months ago, 5 months ago, 6 months ago, you lose track of time with this pandemic. If they were genuinely interested, then I don't know why the deal didn't go through, other than, as you say, the politics of TV rights. And I think that's what it came down to. You know, as an outsider looking in, as somebody who's worked in the media, I said to people very early on, if those in the Middle East are putting pressure on the Premier League, bearing in mind how much money they're giving to the Premier League for the rights to Middle Eastern football, I just couldn't see any way that the Premier League could back that deal, knowing the knock-on effects with beIN and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it'll rumble on, I'm sure. Let's get to some of the questions. Michael Kelly says, I've been looking forward to see Mick and listening to his take on current shambles at St James's. Mick has been a big miss reporting and commentating on local radio, and he hopes you keep him well. Okay. James Brown says, afternoon, guys. Mick, what was it like to arrive at Newcastle in 91 under Ozzy Ardiles, and then we become the entertainers a few years later? And Lee Taylor, following in the same vein, says, what can you remember about Keegan's first match in charge at home to Bristol City? And did you ever think the club would go on to hit the heights and the highs of becoming the entertainers?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think it was the second of those three questions. You know, what a lot of people have to remember is, even though they think it's shite at the moment, and even though they think that they're supporting a club that they never previously supported, back in 1991, as you know, it wasn't great. It wasn't great at all. You know, it all boiled down to the arrival of a fella in 1992 who transformed the football club, I've said this a million times, transformed my life, transformed that football club, transformed the lives of Newcastle United fans all over the world, Kevin Keegan. I mean, you know, had Keegan not come, then, you know, that football club, I don't know where it would have been. We really don't know, you know. You know, that they were breaking world records. You know, you have to pinch yourself nowadays to think and remind yourself that they were such a huge football club and a high-profile football club. And in many ways, again, going back to stuff I've said over the years, they've in many ways created the problems that they're suffering as a result of now, in that they upped the ante so much in terms of money and investment in football. You know, they were breaking world records for Shearer. They were breaking defensive records for Warren Barton. They were breaking this record and that record in terms of signings. It was an incredible time. And no, in 1991, I never imagined for a moment that it would go on to hit the heights that it hit. But like every high in life, there's a low afterwards. And the low, I'm afraid, has been too long now. And it's been down to one person and one person only, the owner. You know, if the owner wasn't there, if the ownership was better, even if it wasn't as wealthy, if there was a care, you know, the C words, care and crowd, they have neither, Newcastle. They have no care for the club at the top end, and they have no crowd at the bottom end.
Yes, here. John Richard says, what is your favourite and your worst match that you and Ando commentated on?
Oh, dear me.
Got a few to pick from.
No, I honestly, I thought we were coming on to talk about Steve Bruce and Newcastle. If I'd have had to gone, I don't know. The obvious one, Steve. You know, anybody listening to this will know. I mean, the obvious highs were Barcelona, were Manchester United, Croatia, Zagreb. The downs, I really care not. I mean, I equate the downs and the bad matches and the bad games to the most disappointing. And the most disappointing were absolutely, I don't think I've got any doubt in my mind, the defeat at Anfield, the 4-3 Anfield, the first one, and the cup finals. probably throw in the semi-final as well, because we played better in the semi-final than we did in either of the finals, and we would have beaten Aston Villa in the final. And going back to the point you made before about Steve Bruce would have got stick from both ends last night had there been a crowd at Villa Park. I don't even want to. Aston Villa don't even register on my radar these days because of the behaviour the year we went down. I went from quite liking them. I used to work with Mick Martin, as you know, and Mick's dad, Con, who was a fantastic player in his day, played for Aston Villa. And we used to go to Villa Park back in the day, and we'd bowl up at on Trinity Road there. And the stewards were respectful, and it's a famous old club. It's a proper club, you know. And they used to say, "Oh, your dad was great." And Mick used to take great pleasure in his dad being remembered by the people of Aston Villa. And then one day, they got the bed sheets out, and it was Shearer this and Ant and Deck that. And from then on in, Aston Villa as a football club disappeared from my mentality. And last night, honestly, I heard them saying, "Oh, you know, Steve Bruce got stick off Aston Villa fans." It almost made me defend Steve Bruce rather than think, "Oh God, another set of fans suffered at the hands of Steve Bruce," because they deserve nothing, Aston Villa.
Yeah, I would agree. Chippers says, question for Mick, why play 5 at the back against Sheffield United and Villa, yet 4 against Arsenal when it's 2 wins in 25 with 5 at the back? I mean, to me, it just shows 5 at the back clearly doesn't work.
I don't think he knows, Steve. I don't think he knows in his right mind, and he has had problems with injuries. But I just don't think I don't think he looked haunted after the game last night. And again, going back to managers I've worked with over the years, and I do think he's a good guy. There's a lot to like about Steve Bruce. I think he's an honest player. You know, I think had he played for Newcastle, he probably would have been a legend because of his attitude and the way he plays the game. But he looked haunted after. That was the first time last night after the game that I thought to myself, it looks like it's getting to him. And I've seen managers over the years at Newcastle look ill and look as if they're really, really not enjoying it. And the problem is, once upon a time, people used to fall on their sword. You can't do that in football anymore because of the loss of your contractual earnings, etc., etc. But he's, you know, I don't. Back 5, back 4. You're right. I mean, you go to the one thing I was annoyed about with Sheffield United was they're the worst team in the division, and you're treating them as if they're a Manchester City or an Arsenal. You're paying them too much respect. You're too worried about what they're going to do rather than what you're going to do. So you don't do that. And then conversely, you could say to yourself, well, Arsenal's a free hit, so you play 4 at the back and you're a bit expansive, but you probably not going to win the game anyway, so why not give it a go? But that would be my attitude at Sheffield United. You know, you impose yourself on them, but he's chopping and changing. He's got players available and then not available. So I think it's difficult for him. But the other thing that annoys me about football and people who talk about football is that at the end of the day, it's a very simple game, and people talk about systems and they talk about formations. Systems and formations don't win games. Players win games. And the better your players, the better your team. And you can put better players into any formation and you'll win the game. So it goes back all the time to this lack of investment. You know, we spent 40 million on a fella, and I'm going to say this now. He is, pound for pound, the worst footballer I have ever come across, regardless of whether it's Newcastle United or whoever. Whoever sanctioned the signing of Joel Linton for 40 million should lose their job. It's ridiculous, because that 40 million could have been spent on 3, 12 or 13 million pound players who might do a job for you, or get you 2 20 million pound players. Or, and I love this, 55 Rob Lees.
Wow. Putting it into that kind of perspective.
55 Rob Lees for Joel Linton. Absolute madness.
Brilliant. Strange Brew, well, it's carrying on the player side of things. He says, Mick, do you think we've got the players to survive if they were played correctly? I'm clinging on to the fact that we do, and we might just save us.
Well, again, going back to the owner and his lack of understanding, his lack of empathy, his lack of, his lack of everything, really. He left it too late with Alan. He gave Alan 8 games, and they were relegated. He gave Rafa 10 games, and they were relegated. At this minute in time, the way that these players are playing, they're going to get relegated unless he changes it. Now, whether he does or not, I don't know. But they are in peril at the moment. You know, I think Sheffield United and West Brom have pretty much gone. I mean, West Brom have rolled the dice big style to get Sam in. The days of firefighting. I mean, Tony Pulis has been into places and got the sack pretty quickly. So that divine right that some managers seem to think that they had once upon a time to keep teams up doesn't exist anymore. So I think it's down to Newcastle or Fulham at this minute in time. And I quite like Fulham. You know, when I see Fulham on occasions, I think they've got a bit about them. What I would say as well is, if we're looking further down the line at who succeeds Steve Bruce, because somebody will one day succeed Steve Bruce. It might be today, it might be tomorrow, it might be next week, it might be the week after, it might be 6 months' time. You never know with this fella. Scott Parker. Scott Parker, former Newcastle player, great guy, good thinker on the game. I think sooner or later he'll end up at a bigger club than Fulham, and I wouldn't be averse to him popping up and appearing at St James's as a manager one day.
I guess that depends on whether a takeover goes through.
Well, exactly. I mean, this is everybody saying, well, get rid of Bruce. Who's going to take the job? You know, I think once upon a time that the poison chalice phrase was probably overstating it a little bit, and there was always going to be somebody going to take the job at St James's. Slowly but surely, people are just thinking, I'm not going there. You know, there's no point. I'll just ruin somebody said to me, Steven Gerrard. And then I was reminded, of course, that Mike Ashley was in at Rangers, and anybody at Glasgow Rangers will be telling Steven Gerrard, don't touch him with a barge pole. And if you're Steven Gerrard and you're looking long term, you're not going to ruin your CV by taking what on the face of it is a great, it's a nice stepping stone, isn't it? Glasgow Rangers, Newcastle United, Anfield. You'd ruin it completely unless you were working for the right people at St James's. And he wouldn't be working for the right people. And Glasgow Rangers will be telling him that because they fell foul of Mike Ashley as well.
Yeah. Mad Mark says Spanish football expert William Balag has said that Rafa's waiting to see what happens in England before committing to his next job. He added there's a bit of unfinished business at Newcastle. Of course, Rafa leaving China got the tongues wagging on Tyneside. But from my perspective, again, that won't happen, I don't think, unless the takeover goes through.
Do you know what it is? I've read that 2 or 3 other places today, and I respect your opinion, Steve. And I respect the opinions of people who've wrote that this morning saying it just won't happen. I'm not sure, I mean, Rafa's a canny fella. And if Rafa thinks that somewhere down the line, as I'm sure he did however many months ago, that the ownership might change, why not get in there now? Why not get in there now and work from within and be the go-between between investors? If he's still got connections to investors, I mean, who knows? I mean, this is completely off the top of my head, Steve, but it doesn't seem to me to be the most improbable fantasy in the world. Where has Rafa Benitez been for the last year or couple of years? Where is all the modern money in football? Where is all the modern money in the world at the minute? It's in China. Who's to say Rafa Benitez hasn't got somebody in China with billions saying to them, you want to get involved in England, as the Chinese have got involved in at least 3 or 4. Are they not? I think they're involved at Aston Villa, to be honest. Yeah. There's certainly an Oriental connection at some point with Aston Villa. Who's to say Rafa hasn't got somebody lined up as an investor and is saying, let's go back to England. I know exactly the place we need to go back. That, by the way, is a complete fantasy on my part. The way
the journalism works now, that'll be back page tomorrow, Mick. So Paul Oxley says, always remember listening to you. Leicester away in my mate's garage when we needed a win to stay in Division 2 as it was then. And we got a 2-1 win, Peacock and an own goal. And Paul also says, also the commentary further on in your career. He says, the Alan Shearer line springs to mind. If you want the man, you want the main man. Alan Shearer, classic line.
Funnily enough, because again, I mean, it's changed beyond belief, football. And obviously the pandemic has just added another dimension to it with no crowds and COVID, etc. But somebody posted some pictures the other week of that. I'm presuming it was a Saturday afternoon at Filbert Street. It was madness. You were probably there. I
was there. Yeah, I actually found me tickets the other day when I was on the show. Bizarrely, I was clearing out the loft. There it is, Mick. I've just put it up there. There's my ticket. That is my ticket from that game. Yeah, East Stand. I was in the lower section. What a day that was, Mick.
Yeah, but it was absolute madness. I mean, there were Geordies everywhere. There were Leicester fans fighting. I mean, it might as well have been 1875 compared to football these days. Do you know what I mean? It was, the ground looked like Filbert Street used to look like. There were fences, there were pylons, there were people climbing to get in, there were people on the pitch. It was absolutely crackers. And you think to yourself, what's that? That's 30 odd years. It's within 30 years. And yet it looked like the pictures looked like something from a distant age. You expected the Lusitania and the Titanic to sort of sail across in the background. I mean, it was madness. But I mean, as it turned out that day, the result wouldn't have mattered anyway. But that's by the by. But it's great memories. Great memories.
Definitely. Billy Gaddis says, just to confirm for Mick Lowes, we miss your commentaries. The young lad doing your old job isn't a patch on you, mate. On NUFC, he says, Lewis can't defend. Hendrick is rubbish. And Joe Linton, I agree, is an absolute waste of money.
Well, funny enough, again, I don't know the guy, and I'm sure he's a nice fella. But I watched the game. I can't remember which one it was. Maybe 3 games ago. And I spoke to Ando afterwards because we normally speak after the games. And I said, do you know what it is? It got to about 75 minutes and Jeff Hendrick was mentioned. And I said, I didn't even know he was on the pitch. I had no idea he was on the pitch. And it was much the same last night. But then again, I suppose Steve Bruce might say in an ideal world, he might not be in the side because he's missing players, etc., etc. But it goes back to what we said. It's quality. If you're gonna win games, if you're gonna put a team together, you need a bit of quality. And Jeff Hendricks has been a good pro, good steady away pro over the years. But I'm with the best will in the world and all due respect to him, Jeff Hendrick isn't going to be the difference between Newcastle staying in the Premier League and playing Championship football next season.
Yeah, lots of comments on the pundits. What does Mick think of the comments of ex-pro pundits like Hughes, Lawrence and Savage saying our expectations are too high as fans?
It's never changed, has it? It's never changed. I do think, and I am lucky enough to have worked there for 25 years, but I'm not sure that my opinion of Newcastle would have been the same had I not worked there. So a lot of it, you do have to. I mean, I remember when I left, I think Alfie Joey said to me, he said, Mick, you're the perfect commentator for Newcastle United because you're passionate. And I said to him, I said, if you're a commentator and you want to work and you're a passionate commentator, you need to work in the northeast of England because until you've been there, you don't know. You don't know that it is. It's the life and soul of the place. It's somewhere where you're working with like-minded people. You're working with people who think the same way as you. Yes, it's not always great. It's not great now, but you would rather work there than somewhere where it's sanitized and you just get through a job Monday to Friday. You don't really care what happens on a Saturday. You've got a press conference on a Tuesday. It's full on at Newcastle. It is absolutely full on. So maybe some people do lose perspective of it. And of course, a lot of them, they'll have got stick when they went to St James's. So maybe they were tainted by that. But A bit like, the comment just now about Matthew Raisbeck. Matthew Raisbeck to me does a great job. I'm never going to knock. I'm never going to knock him, and I recommended him, and I hope I helped him on his way. And it's about opinions. It's about opinions, So if people think that Mark Hughes or whichever pundit is poor, and they think that Matthew Raisbeck isn't as good as me, then that's opinions, and you can't change opinions, and football would never be the same unless people have opinions.
We've been very lucky, Mick. We've had you, we've got Razor now, and Ando's been a stalwart. I grew up with Charles Harrison and Graham Courtney. Those guys were legend of the game on on a different radio station. So it's all, as you say, it's all about opinions. And those of you who listen to Radio 5, there's been some legends on there as well. So it is all about opinions, but it's a changing world we live in. Jack says, who's the most impressive player you've ever come across at Newcastle, Mick? And he hopes you're well.
On the pitch or off the pitch?
I think both. Maybe it's both. Oh
my God! You're throwing these at me. I always said, funnily enough, off the pitch, the one who, and it's both on and off the pitch. And I think I always said that he was probably my favourite player in terms of unsung hero. And I've got a good mate, Steve Lillis, who does a lot of boxing stuff, who's a Fulham fan. And I posted the fact that in all my time at Newcastle, the nicest guy, the most respectful guy, and a guy who did a great job on the pitch was Aaron Hughes.
Yeah.
And he said, and of course, Aaron went to Fulham, and he said he was fantastic at Fulham as well. So, Aaron Hughes was one. I mean, there were plenty. In terms of the worst, I don't think it's. I've gone out on a limb with Joe Linton. I'll stick to that. I mean,
It's a good one, though.
Steve. I thought there would never be. I thought there would never be one to better Fumaca, but your Fumacas, your Cordonis, your
Marcelino.
Your Gavilan. No, you see, Marcelino's an interesting one. You see, again, I always take exception to this because Marcelino got all sorts of stick because he broke his finger.
Yeah.
You talk to Derek Wright, who's the medical supremo at Newcastle, and we had a laugh one day. He said, Mick, the fans don't understand. What he did was I can't remember the exact problem. But basically, the tendons in one of his finger, he snapped the tendons.
Right.
And in order to read the tendons in your arm, if you can sort of picture it, they go from your elbow all the way to the tips of your fingers. They had to open his entire forearm up, find the tendon somewhere around his elbow, and pull it to find the tendon that was disconnected in his finger, and basically tie them together like a you can imagine a joint like that.
Yeah.
So it wasn't as simple as he's broken his finger and he's out. So anyway, no, Marcelino is on a par with Messi compared to Joe Linton.
It gets better. John Paul says, "What's your opinion on John Joe Shelby?"
Like him, did have some dealings with him. Proper fella. I like the fact that he's humble in terms that he came from a difficult place. He's had difficult times. I think he was from a council estate in East London, but I don't think he helps himself. That's what I would say. I think there's a time. Far be it from me to tell footballers what they should and shouldn't do, but he over elaborates. He over ices the cake on occasions. There are occasions when it needs to go 5 yards, it needs to go 3 yards. He still wants to hit the $1 million ball, and he's a bit moody. But then I think that one of the reasons I don't have a problem with that necessarily with some footballers, it's because he cares. I don't think he's one of them who's moody because he doesn't care. I think he's moody because things aren't going well. He wants them to go better. He wants to play in a winning side. It's a bit like Steve Bruce. Again, people might take exception to this, but I don't think he's enjoying what he's going through at the minute. I think he cares. I honestly think he cares. I think he has to care because A, he's a Geordie, B, he's a Newcastle fan, and B, he's a principled footballer who played lots of games in the press. I don't think, and I know others, I can think of a Dutchman, for instance, who didn't care. You know, he was manager of Newcastle United. He didn't care whether he was there or not necessarily. He was just in a job, you know. There have been other managers as well. Again, I won't name them, although I've told you who the other one is. Who I think genuinely, when it started going pear-shaped, didn't care. They thought, well, okay, I'll get paid up, I'll get sacked, I'll go somewhere else. You know, after all, football management is probably the most lucrative job in the world in terms of you can fail and get a better job 5 minutes later, you know?
Yeah.
I think Steve Bruce cares. I haven't come on here to defend Steve Bruce because I honestly think at this minute in time, he shouldn't probably be in the job. I think if Newcastle want to survive, I think if Newcastle want to avoid the championship, they need to give somebody a bit more time to help them survive. I hate to say it, but I would make a change. But I think he cares. I do think he cares. And I think he knows as well, it's about winning games. That's what management's all about. He's not an idiot, you know. He's a proper football fella, and I'm sure he sits at home thinking, this is rubbish. This is poor. I can't put my finger on it. I can't. But I think he knows he probably should go.
Yeah, okay, we're not going to get any arguments from anybody, I don't think, on that. A lot of people talk about managers potentially coming in, and you know, the one name that's, you know, probably at the top of most lists is Eddie Howe. And I guess that's if the takeover doesn't go through. And for me, it's not a name that I'm championing because he's just took Bournemouth down. I think him coming into this car crash of a club at the moment would be a nightmare. And we're also being linked with one of his coaches at Bournemouth who's still there, Graham Jones, of course, which again appears strange. Steve Bruce refused to talk about that last night.
Yeah, I saw his interview.
Clearly annoyed him when he was asked the question. Yeah. Didn't want to talk about it. So I'll give you those two names. What do you think of those two names?
Well, the Graham Jones one, I have to say that in terms of results and in terms of performances at Newcastle, I've just said there that I do think Steve Bruce cares. The results are awful, but I look around him and I don't see any sort of hierarchy. I don't see any sort of staff. I don't see anybody saying to Steve Bruce, look, we need to do this, we need to do that. So you've got Stephen Clements, you've got Steve Agnew, and they seem like a band of brothers, but they seem like a band of brothers who aren't really putting it in. Graham Jones is a coach who's worked at a very high level with some very good managers, particularly Roberto Martinez, obviously. But then again, what worries me more than attracts me to him is that he's a Geordie and he was at North Shields and he's been in the Northeast and he's born in the Northeast. And you think, well, hang on a minute, is this just another favour to Steve Bruce? I don't know. I mean, the whole coaching environment in football these days has changed so much from when Steve Bruce was a player. You know, I think the thing with Rafa is he worked with essentially the same sort of squad as Steve Bruce, and there's an argument that says that he didn't do a whole lot better. But what he did do was he drilled them and drilled them and drilled them. He was a bit more of a headmaster than Steve Bruce, who seems to think, outwardly anyway, to be much happier being one of the lads. You know, I know players who fell out with Rafa because back on the training pitch, drills, defense against attack. I get the impression that with Steve Bruce, it's a lot more relaxed. And the problem with footballers these days is unless you sit on them, unless you keep them focused and you because the adrenaline and the focus isn't in the stadium because there's not 52,000. So on the training pitch, there's even more emphasis on getting it right because you're not going to go out there on a Saturday afternoon and be able to replicate it, you know? So it's very difficult. I just think that the job that Rafa did in some ways was no better than Steve Bruce, but at the same time, I think he got more out of his players than Rafa is.
Yeah, I think unfortunately for Steve Bruce, he was always on a hiding to nothing. Very similar in a lot of ways, although not at the same level, following Keegan for Dalglish. You know, he was always on a hiding to nothing. You know, you lose your fans' favourite, the next man in is going to have that to deal with and everything else.
But Steve, the difference is that Kenny Dalglish was following a superstar.
Yeah.
Kenny Dalglish was following somebody who had absolutely revolutionised a football club. Mm-hmm. You know, Steve Bruce was following Rafa Benitez, who was basically just keeping Newcastle's heads above water. Yeah. You know. I mean, but he had a crowd in there. You know, this whole
he had a crowd, and he also, you know, Bruce has had 110 million to spend. Rafa made 11 million profit.
Yeah, and there is no doubt that I can't in one breath say Joe Linton's a waste of space and say that he hasn't had some level of investment. He has had levels of investment, you know, Almiron, etc. You know, it's been poorly spent, but it's just not the proper sort of investment. It's not investment in players who are going to help. So, and you don't know who's pulling the strings, but then you don't know that in football generally. I mean, after the game last night, Dean Smith's asked about Aston Villa's new signing. He said, I can't tell you. I'm not in contact with I don't know what he called him, director of football or whatever.
He didn't even know.
Exactly. Who's making the decisions at these football clubs? You're talking about millions of pounds, and some guy sitting in an office somewhere picking his nose is writing the checks.
Mm. It's crazy. Football's not what we knew.
It's, you know, I didn't want to come on and give it the Victor Meldrew, but I'm sorry. There's a lot of football at this minute in time which brings out the Victor Meldrew in me in terms of it never used to be this way, you know.
You know, Mick, you're on a channel which is probably, you know, that's all we tend to preach, to be honest. There's a lot of grumpy old men on here. I'm one of them. Tom says, where do you think Newcastle need to strengthen in the transfer window? I know this again is difficult because, you know, we're not going to get a great deal of money to spend. We might actually looking to sell the club. But in an ideal world, where do we need to strengthen if we're going to, you know, add to this squad and stay in the Premier League?
Well, the fact that we haven't scored a goal in 8 games just about tells you that. I mean, we need a goal scorer. We need a goal scorer. And again, I'm beginning to think I'm sounding like a scratch record now. But, you know, going back to our favourite Brazilian, I don't know why he even plays it. Because he's just taken a shirt, you know. He gets played time and time again. And I'm sorry, he's not going to hit a barn door with a banjo anytime soon. And all you're doing is taking a shirt away from somebody, you know. Dwight Gale, play Dwight Gale, play the young kid Anderson. You know, give somebody the opportunity to make a name for themselves. Give somebody the opportunity to be better than Joel Linton. And I'm not too sure anybody could possibly not be better than Joel Linton. And then again, is he going to get any funds in the transfer window? Because again, it's a catch-22 situation. Why would you give money to a manager who's failing? You know, I know we had the famous January of Sissoko, Debussy, Umbiwa, which saved the day back in the day, but they were being added to a squad which already had Cisse, Demba Ba, Cabaye. You know, going back to the initial statement about systems and players win games, not systems. And I'll tell you what, managers will tell you, players win games, not managers. It's all down to players.
Yeah, you're right. What did you make of the players' reaction at the end of the game last night? Says Michael Getty. Yeah. I suppose he's talking about that. I mean, that's the photo that's in circulation, which Sky picked up on Hendrick and Lewis, and I mean, it's not one of joy, is it? They look sick as chips.
I mean, I didn't know whether to be heartened by it, or disappointed by it, or annoyed by it. You know, the camera panned round, and there they were. I think Cher was the first one, wasn't he? He was sort of stood there, but my opinion of him. But then there were others like Lewis, and I thought, you know, what are you doing? What are you doing? I wasn't sure whether that was a cry for help. I don't know whether it was something that they thought would endear them to the crowd because they were upset. Because I think if it was me, I'd leg it to the dressing room and start screaming and bawling. You know, I mean, I thought what was more pertinent was the comment from Grealish, which has made a few of the papers today. You've seen that, have you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now that, cool, blimey. I mean, some people have said it was appalling. Some people say it wasn't. But anyone who's played football knows that's exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
But what that said to me, Steve, is that is the general opinion of Newcastle United. Again, going back to my dislike of Aston Villa, I could imagine a player from Brighton and Hove Albion or Fulham saying that, because if you're up against a side that are doing what or not doing what we were doing, then I mean that worries me more that it's generally considered that Newcastle United are shite.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's going to run and run, unfortunately. Yeah, Paul Gibson asks a $1 million question. He says, if we get beat off Leeds, do you think Steve Bruce will be sacked? Is there a cut-off point for Mike Ashley and Lee Charnley here?
Again, because it's impossible to read him. It's impossible to second-guess him. But I did say on Friday, on a radio show on Friday, that if he lost against Aston Villa and lost against Leeds United, I think he'll lose his job. Mm-hmm. And he's lost one of the two, and you wouldn't have a penny on them winning against Leeds United. So I don't know. I like I said before, I don't wish it upon him. I think there's a certain, I have a certain amount of sympathy for him, but I had a certain amount of sympathy for a lot of managers over the years, and they'll look you in the face and they'll say, Mick, I know what the business is about. It's about winning games of football. And when I'm afraid, at this stage of the season, when you've got 10 games unbeaten and you haven't scored in 8, it's very, very difficult to justify your existence.
Yeah, it is. Apparently, according to Mad Mark, the written media section for Steve Bruce's press conference tomorrow has been scrapped. Radio and TV broadcasters only, apparently, which he reckons Newcastle trying to save his bacon from a real grilling. I get what you've done there. Strange. And once you start doing things like that, that starts to wind up certain sections of the media.
Steve, it doesn't help him. It doesn't help Steve Bruce. You know? And I'm pretty sure, I don't know for certain, but I would think Steve Bruce is annoyed by that because he's a big enough fella. You know, he's a man enough to face the press. Now, if that has been taken out of his hands and he hasn't asked for that, then I would be going mad if I was Steve Bruce, because that's tantamount to I can't take it. I don't want to face you. I'm scared of you. I don't want to answer the questions. Now, he's never struck me. I'm going to take you back. I wanted to air this. I've got a mate called Terry Cochran, right?
Yeah.
Who played for Northern Ireland, played for Middlesbrough, and I've known Cocky for a lot of years. And he was with me at a game at Old Trafford back in the mid-90s, right? And he played with Steve Bruce at Gillingham, right? And we went to the game, and he had a plastic bag full of posters and programs and all sorts of nonsense. And I said, "What have you got there?" And he said, "I've got all these Manchester United pictures. All these Manchester United fans near me knew that I was coming here, and I phoned Steve Bruce, and he's got us players' lounge tickets afterwards, and I'm going to get all these things signed." And I looked at it and I thought, "Oh my God, you know, this is terrible. This is not going to happen, you know." So the game finished. We knocked on the door. Door opened. Steve Bruce came across to Terry Cochran like Lionel Messi had walked in the room. Now, Cochran was a good player, but he played with Steve Bruce at Gillingham. And he said, "What have you got there, Cocky?" He said, "I've got all these pictures." And all of us, he went, "Cantona, get over here. Coley, get over here. Dwight York, Neville, get over here. Sign this. And by the way, this fella was a player." And he made Terry Cochran, who's about 5'7", he made him about 6'8" in this room. And Eric Cantona was coming across with pens, signing his picture. And I was sat there, and I don't think I've ever repeated this conversation to Steve Bruce himself. But I looked at him and I thought, what a fella you are. He was the captain of the Premier League champions. He was one of the biggest characters in the Premier League. But he played with this kid at Gillingham, and he was telling people, he said, "You couldn't lace his boots, this left Cochran." You know, he was bigging him up, but genuinely bigging him up, you know. And I just thought, what a fella. What a fella.
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
that was Steve Bruce for me.
It's good to hear that kind of story, Mick, because, you know, I've said it on this show many times over the last 12 months, that Steve Bruce probably is a genuine fella. I've bumped into him, I've seen him, I haven't had any dealings with him because I've never had to, but ultimately I would imagine he's a cracking fella and the kind you'd probably be able to go for a pint with.
Yeah.
However, you know, as a Newcastle manager,
he's got to go. He's got to go.
Yeah, that's basically it. Mark Henderson says, last 10 minutes, he says, I still think given the job to Lee Clark until the end of the season is worth a shout. He would be better than Steve Bruce. Now, a lot of call for that. We had Clarkey and Steve Howe on about 3 weeks ago, and, you know, both of them talking about, you know, the game and the club just as honestly as you have. And, you know, Lee has always said, more than happy to step in. And Steve Howe said, you couldn't do much worse.
No.
Put him in. And, you know, both of them have supported Steve Bruce throughout, but, you know, they were championing Clarkey to go in. And, of course, he's worked for Mike Ashley, fleetingly, of course, but he worked there under Allardyce.
And it's interesting, you know, if you look at, I think there've been, 10 managers in 14 years under Ashley. There has always been that flirtation with Geordie. So, you know, if we call KK a Geordie, so to speak, you know, he brought KK back second time. He gave Alan the job. You've got, you know, Steve Bruce. John Carver, of course, was in charge for a while. So I don't think he's averse to it. But at the same time, again, going back to the Steve Bruce thing about caring, I think it's obvious. I think in some ways it's more difficult for people who have the club close to heart to work for him. You know, it's one thing being appointed by him. It's another thing to work for him. And I think once you're in the inner sanctum, once you're the guy who's taking the calls saying you can't do this, you can't do that, you've not got this, you've not got that, it hits you even harder. And, you know, it's ironic that the two most successful managers were those that really didn't have any emotional ties to Tyneside. So you had Pardew, who got a 5th place finish, and you had Rafa, who, although he didn't really do anything, at least had the club going in the right direction. You know, the rest of them were either, you know, Chris Hughton, you know, got the job by transition, so he wasn't genuinely appointed. And the only other ones, Steve McLaren, Allardyce was there when Ashley arrived. So, you know, I agree. I don't think he could do any worse. But again, going back to the players thing, whether Lee Clark could relate to and get his message over to your modern day player at Premier League level, I would put a question mark against. In fact, I would put a question mark against that happening with any manager other than the 21st century breed of coaches that everyone's turning to. I think it sounds terrible, but I think anybody who played the game prior to 2000 hasn't got a chance in modern day football in terms of management.
Yeah. What's your thoughts on the goalkeeping situation? I mean, when you were covering Newcastle on that on the beat, we've never really struggled for good goalkeepers, and we're in that situation again. But Dubravka and Darlow, I think a lot of people just expected Dubravka to walk straight back in, but Darlow, because of the amount of work he's had to do, he's been outstanding.
Well, it's funny, you know, because Darlow's been getting a lot of plaudits, and Ando will tell you this. Every time I speak to Ando about Newcastle, every game we speak after the game, I say he's awful on crosses. He's awful on crosses. People keep saying to me, oh, if they get relegated, him and Wilson will both get a top club. And I keep saying, Wilson maybe. Every chance Wilson, actually. But Darlow on crosses. I mean, the first goal last night, what's he doing?
Yeah.
What's he doing? And if you watch him on crosses generally, he's not good. You know, he's a decent keeper. And a bit like Dubravka, he's a good shot stopper. But you think about Stephen Harper and Shay Given. I mean, golden generation of keepers. You know, and if Steve Harper didn't have Shay Given ahead of him, you know, Steve Harper's playing 300 Premier League games for somebody. You know, I don't think Dubravka and Darlow, either one of them, is going to be the difference between Newcastle surviving and being relegated.
I suppose the next question, the one to really finish on, is has this team got enough to stay up? You, like me, have watched relegations under Ashley. We know how it works, and we know what kind of team can survive. We've seen teams stay up, of course. Who can forget the day when John Carver's Newcastle stayed up with Jonas getting that goal and taking his shirt off and waving it around St James's Park? Has this team got got what it takes to stay up, Mick?
At this minute in time, Steve, they're a million miles away from it. At this minute in time, they are a relegation waiting to happen. The only thing that can save them at this minute in time is there being 3 clubs worse than them, and 3 clubs who haven't, previously picked up enough points. And as I said earlier, I think Sheffield United and West Brom have probably bagged 2 of the 3 spots. So it's down to us and Fulham. And if you ask me now, unless they change considerably, I know, was it 6 or 7 points? I mean, it's quite a sizable gap, but I wouldn't have a penny on us surviving at the minute. It's got to change. Something has got to click. So, there's either a change of manager, either a change of personnel, whatever it would be. But at this minute in time, as I said before, he left it until 8 games with Alan. He left it until 10 games, but both of those were in March and April, by the way. So we're still only in January. So there is time. I don't want somebody to lose their job, and especially in the current climate. Although, we're not talking real world, are we? We're talking about somebody who's got £1 million payoff. But he needs to change it. He needs to change it. But the owner, you don't know. He is so apathetic. He is so disinterested. He will get interested once the Sky money looks like it's going to disappear again. But you could have said that in 2009 and 16 or whenever it was. Why did he let it slide then? But he did. I don't know. At this minute in time, it's a relegation waiting to happen.
Yeah, it is. A quick question there from Tom. He just says, would you have Josh King from Bournemouth?
No.
As he says,
Steve, you need proven players.
Yeah,
you need proven players. I'd rather have. I don't know. I'd rather have a fit Andy Carroll than Josh King.
Yeah. As he says, off topic, but did Dennis Bergkamp mean it when he scored that goal against Newcastle?
Leicester. No.
Bergkamp when he turned Dabby's ass.
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
Mick, what are you up to these days? That's one of the questions a lot of people are asking. Are you just enjoying retirement? Can people hear you anywhere?
I'm doing bits and bobs, but nobody's doing anything at the minute, Steve. That's the problem, I mean, whatever things I had in the pipeline or whatever thoughts I had on doing this and doing that and the other, it's all put on hold. I don't know. What I would say is, again, going back to the Victor Meldrew thing, I'm not missing it. And I'm not sure if I'm not missing it because it's just not the same game, Steve.
No,
I'm sorry. I barely. There was a time when I would know everything and anything about everything going on in football in this country. Now I don't even look who's playing. I don't even watch the games. I'm not talking about Newcastle now. I'm talking about in general. And it'll be very interesting to see whether football goes back and gets back to where it was. Just a little history lesson for you. Because the only thing that this pandemic has ever been likened to is the World War. We've never been through socially anything like this since a World War. Now, obviously, there was no football during the World Wars, but there were 3 or 4 major boom seasons after World War II. 46, 47 and 47, 48 were massive seasons in football because everybody went back to football. I'm not sure that people will not have lost interest and have other things to do with their lives these days when football recommences in a proper way, with crowds, with a proper league season. So I don't know where football's going to be in a year's time. A year ago, I must have said I would have stopped it. Morally, I would have stopped it. I'm not sure I wouldn't have morally stopped it even now. I'm not sure it's right. I don't like the celebrations. I find that disturbing. You know, as still players are hugging each other. And I'm thinking, I'd love to hug my mother. I'd love to hug my sister, but I don't.
Yeah.
But I watch players hugging each other, and that's wrong. You know, it doesn't send the right message out. I know that's off tangent.
It's very important.
I don't like it, Steve. And we're supposed to be watching football because it's a distraction from the mundane, and it's a distraction from our pitiful lives at the minute. And yet we're seeing that. And we're watching crap football. And people are saying, oh, yeah, you know, Leicester could win it. They could win it. They could win it. You wouldn't be winning a proper title, to me. You wouldn't be winning a proper championship. You'd be winning the championship in a season where football's going through the motions. Players are going through the motions.
Yeah, I would agree, mate. It's strange times we're living in, and you know, your opinion is just as valid as the next person. And Steve Hutchinson will leave you with your comment. He just says, on a positive note, we're all still Newcastle United. We love the tune.
Absolutely.
And that will never change. Head up, things will get better. Geordies. And Paul Gibson says, great show, Steve, and the legend that is Mick Lowes. Big thanks to our sponsor who sponsors the StreamYard application, Old Coach House Distillery.co.uk, the world's first alcohol-free distillery. Visit their website, enter the code OCHD to claim their introductory 10% discount and get the most out of your mindful dry January. A big shout out as well to my friends at qtechshop.co.uk, the makers of pool tables and snooker tables in Wallsend. And a big shout out to Jab Signature, who make our flyers as well. Mick, it's been, I told you it would fly over. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on, mate. And hopefully a lot of people saying, would you get Mick back on? I'm sure you'd be up for it maybe next month if I give you a shout, Mick.
Yeah, no problem. And my overriding message is stay safe. You're special people. Stay safe in the Northeast.
Mick, it's absolutely great, and look forward to maybe getting back one day and having a pint with you in Newcastle, with you and Ando somewhere, mate. But listen, you take care. God bless you, mate. Take care. Bye-bye.
See you. Bye-bye.
Critics attack. It feels like I've been talking to myself again.